Go ahead, Grace. I think you should start, and then people can join.
Yeah. Okay, well, welcome everybody who's managed to get online so far. My name is Grace Lally. I'm going to be chairing today's hustings for the Radical Housing Network. Claudia is going to be doing all.
Grace, you're muted. Oh, there we go.
Okay, that was such a bad start. Okay, you muted me, Claudia.
Oh, apologies. I'm trying to admit people and clicking the wrong thing. So,
okay, rewind, start again. Okay,
start again.
Welcome everybody to the hustings. My name is Grace Lally. I'm chairing today's hustings on behalf of the Radical Housing Network. Claudia is going to look after the technical issues and keep an eye on the chat. If anybody wants to raise any urgent issue or respond to what people are saying, they can do that in the chat box. So do feel free to take part in the meeting that way. We have 4 candidates for this constituency. There are other candidates, but we restricted the panel to 4 because we felt that gives the best chance to have enough time to cover all the issues we want to cover. So I'm really grateful to all the candidates who responded and who've come today, and I'm going to introduce them when I call them to respond to the first set of questions. We're going to take them in alphabetical order and rotate their turn to answer questions, so the same person doesn't get the last word on every issue. We've got a lot of people who've submitted questions. We've tried to group them together into certain themes, and some people have submitted their questions in advance, pre-recorded, to make sure that they're able to get their point across clearly and make sure their question comes across as they intended. So Claudia is going to queue up the videos to play questions that are pre-recorded, and where people have not, I'm going to call you to speak when it's your turn to ask the question. So as I say, please do feel free to take part in the meeting by responding in the chat box if you want to respond to anything that's being said by the questioners or by the candidates. And yeah, if Claudia is ready, we can kick off the first set of questions, which is going to be led by Sabine from Central Hill, a really key campaign in the Lambeth and Southwark area at the moment, where we will hopefully get the candidates' response to Sabine's video. Do you want to cue it up, Claudia?
Yeah, just 1 second.
This is where we find out if our techie ideas work. Okay.
Refurbishment was never given as an option to the community of Central Hill. It was either leave the estate as it is or to demolish. Demolishing means moving everyone out and building these extremely high tower blocks, of which 61% are for private sale. So no benefit for the homeless there. Demolition is very costly for the environment. The Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors says that 51% of all the carbon in the life cycle of a building is used before the first person even moves in. And this doesn't even include demolition. It's going to be so destructive for the environment, it damages communities, and it is very costly and very expensive. Far more expensive than refurbishing this estate as it is. The Architects Journal has now come out with the campaign to retrofit first, which many organisations have supported. It is do not demolish existing buildings. There is a climate catastrophe around us, and we cannot afford to be so wasteful with the resources that we have. My question to you as candidates is, do you support the Retrofit First campaign? Do you agree that demolition is damaging for communities, for the environment, and financially is no longer viable for councils to be doing this across London?
That's brilliant, thank you. And Claudia, can you cue up the video? We have a very short clip from Drina, who's in the South Lambeth estate, who's on an estate where the demolition and rebuilding has already started. And her video is hard to hear, but you'll get a really clear sense of the kind of disruption and the noise that they're dealing with day in, day out down there. So do you want to play that one, Claudia?
Of this venture at Vauxhall, which are all pretty much unsold, So are you going to reconsider this in terms of how unviable? I've shown you how ungreen it is, but surely you're going to reconsider the financial implications of granting planning permission to projects like this. We don't understand why it was allowed to go ahead.
Okay, so it was a little bit hard to hear there, but what Drina was saying, that's on the South Lambeth estate. Can you hear me, Claudia? Am I on screen? Sorry.
No, you're fine.
What,
You're fine, Grace.
yeah, what Drina was saying is that that project has started, and she's asking, is it really still viable to be going ahead with making these building these amounts of expensive apartments after COVID, after lockdown, when people are even leaving London? She's asking, is it viable, these schemes, and can they be stopped now? She doesn't, you know, can they pull the plug on them? These are GLA funded projects in South Lambeth estate. And there's one other question on this issue, which is very linked. Georgina should be here. She wants to ask a question about refurbishment. Georgina, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, okay, can you hear me? I can't hear you, but you can hear me.
you.
Oh, right, I can hear you now. Okay. Yeah, I've done a lot of research into this. I'm a council tenant, by the way. Lacaton and Vassal are French architects and recent prize winners of the prestigious Pritzker Award. Their work responds to climatic, ecological, and social emergencies by making sustainable what already exists. Instead of regeneration of public housing blocks in Paris and Bordeaux, for example, they've managed to redesign, upgrade, insulate, and improve space at about a third of the cost of demolishing and rebuilding, whilst maintaining rent stability and without having to decant the occupants. So my question is, especially like Lambeth was was the first council in London to declare a climate emergency, and yet it's kind of going ahead with this kind of practice of demolishing, oversaving what's there and refurbishing. So why is this methodology not being put into practice here?
That's brilliant. Thank you, Georgina. Okay, so I think you get a sense of the questions on this topic, and I'm going to ask the Labour candidate first to speak, Marina Ahmed. Thank you for coming to the Hustings today. If you'd like to respond to those questions, you've got 3 minutes on this topic. Thank you. You have to unmute,
You're
Marina.
muted.
I'm so
yeah.
sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Grace, and thank you to the 3 questioners as well. Clearly, the issue of estate regeneration is something that's very emotive, and it's very, you know, for people who are going through, I can't imagine what that must be like to be told that, you know, you're being asked to move, and that there are situations where you don't want, you know, people don't want you there anymore because your house is about to be demolished. I understand that, and I appreciate how hard that must be for people. I've never been in that situation. I'd not want to be in that situation. But I think there is absolutely a reality here that you have to look at. In Lambeth, and we refer, you know, those properties were being talked about in Lambeth, 30,000 people are on the council housing waiting list at the moment, and over there is a massive, across London and in the constituency, a massive issue of homelessness as well. In Lambeth, there are 5,000 children who are living in temporary accommodation. The problem here is actually, and I'm afraid I'm not, just in the research that I've done, it is actually about money. Lambeth in 2010 lost 120 million from the 250 million that it was supposed to have had for the repair and the refurbishment of properties. And that means that there was £130 million shortfall. Now, what I understand with the properties that of the regeneration projects that you talked about, that the majority of council tenants, even before this came up, wanted to leave because the condition of those properties were not ones that people wanted to live in. And therefore, already they were talking about moving and they wanted to move anyway. I think the issue in terms of environmental compatibility and whether actually we work, whether the retrofitting versus rebuilding argument, I think it's a really important argument to have. But at this moment in time, it is about a reality. And it is about what is affordable and what isn't. But what I can say is that the properties and the investigations that I've done, the properties, the new builds that are being done are actually going to be, and forgive me, I'm just looking at my notes because I'm not an expert on this, but what I can say is that the stock where possible, the carbon emissions are actually going to be far lower, 80% lower than they would be in properties that are already there, and that there was going to be annual assessments of carbon emissions as well, and that where we can in Lambeth, where the council can, refurbishment does take place. So over the last few years, council stock, all council stock has been and kitchens, bathrooms have all been refurbished so that people can live in clean, decent homes.
Can we? Oh, thanks, Marina. You may be able to come back to some of these issues again on some of the other questions, but I'll just move on to the next candidate here on this question. Thank you. So I'm going to call Tim Briggs, who is deputising for the Conservative candidate for this constituency. So thank you, Tim, for stepping in, but you're speaking on behalf of the Conservative candidate. So go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, you're welcome. So just quickly before I respond, just to respond to my, well, first of all, very few people are going to be watching this, so I can afford to be very polite to all my other candidates. So I do this in the spirit of sort of comradeliness and just discussion rather than trying to score political points. But some of the points mentioned by Marina, I'm afraid she's been reading all the spin from the Labour Council. She says there are 30,000 people on the council waiting list. Well, that's 30,000, but that council waiting list hasn't been changed since January or March 2015. So it's actually about 6,000 people bidding. So these are the sorts of figures that get bandied around. Oh, there's 30,000, because no one gets taken on. No one's been taken off the housing waiting list since 2015. So, and you can check that. You're very welcome to send in a freedom of information request. You'll find the same thing. Marina says that the council, it's a matter of money, and the council lost 200 million or 100 million in 2015. That's because a one-off grant of 100 million, the largest decent homes grant for building for retrofitting kitchens and bathrooms, was given to Lambeth Council, the largest in the whole country, and that grant ended. So my Labour colleagues will say, oh, we've lost 100 million. No, you got 100 million, you still didn't use it particularly well. You didn't do all the bathrooms and kitchens that you needed to do, and then they complain about it and say, we've lost a grant. Aren't the Tories evil for not continuing this grant every year? Well, no, it's a one-off grant, the largest in the country. She also says that Marina said that there were not properties that people wanted to live in. Again, if you speak to anyone on Central Hill, anyone on Cressingham Gardens, they will tell you, and I'm sure Marina, may have done, they will tell you that these are beautiful places that just need to be kept up. So in reference to the retrofitting first, I've been fighting very hard for Cressingham Gardens, and well, not very hard, but as hard as I can when I can as a councillor, fighting to retrofit. These are properties which, particularly Cressingham Gardens, the Labour Council didn't repair properly for many years, and then it's used that as an excuse to say that they now need to knock the whole place down. So I do believe in retrofitting first. It's what councils like Wandsworth Council do, and Wandsworth Council have built 1,000 homes recently over the last 3 or 4 years, simply using land which is available to them, which is council land. I do think that there are ways in which we can improve the sort of sustainability of the properties that are built. The one lady was right, she pointed out that there's a climate emergency that the Lambeth Council have called, and yet at the same time they pay absolutely no attention to the way in which these properties that they're building are built. But that's part of the problem with Lambeth Council. Are you going to stop me?
Yeah, Tim.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay, let me just
You guys keep an eye on your own timing as well, so you know when your time is nearly up.
Can I just so one point, which I can't remember because so anyway, carry on. Yeah. Sorry.
Can we come back to the next round? Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. And please do remember to respond to the questioner. So the next candidate I'm going to ask is Florence Zero, who's representing the Lib Dems in this constituency. So thank you, Florence, for coming. If you'd like to respond to the questions, that would be great. You have 3 minutes. Do you want to unmute? Oh no.
You need to unmute.
Florence is frozen.
We're all frozen now. Anyone there?
Claudia, can you unmute her anyway?
You unmute, Florence?
Can you?
No, I can ask her to unmute, which is what I've done.
Yeah. See if you can get her to hear you.
Yeah, she should be unmuted now.
Unmuted now. I'm
there you
sorry
go.
about this technological issues. Thank you very much, Grace, for inviting me today. It's great to be here, and I really look forward to this debate. So we had questions. One question from Sabine about Central Hill. I know Central Hill quite well because I visited Central Hill some weeks ago, and it's an absolutely delightful estate. And I'm really disappointed to see that a Labour council wishes to demolish such a beautiful estate, which was built by a female architect in the 60s. And that was an achievement for a female architect. And at that time, architects had really in mind to improve people's quality of life. And you can see how it's designed with very much that in mind. And I don't understand why we can't renovate or retrofit or re-insulate this estate. Sorry, is there a technical issue? Can you hear me? Yes? Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, we can hear you fine, Florence. I think Grace is having issues, so I'm just going to contact her in the chat.
Right, okay, so yes, Lambeth Council has pledged to go carbon free in 2030, but then the council is also willing to demolish estates, and I think it's a bit contradictory. You can't be carbon free, no emission by 2030 and keep on demolishing estates and rebuilding new ones because of all the embodied carbon linked to demolition and to rebuilding. So, right, I think that Central Hill for me is a heartbreak. And of course, we should keep those beautiful estates and we should renovate them, insulate them, improve them. And I'm sure that that would be cheaper than demolishing and rebuilding. But what we also need to bear in mind is that when you demolish and you densify, you build high rise, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the community. There's going to be a lot of pressure on public transports. There's going to be more pressure on GP surgeries, on schools. And I'm not sure that this has been really thought through. And I'm not sure that this has been really planned. So I'm really worried about all those plans that Lambeth Council is making of densifying, demolishing, rebuilding, densifying without an investment in public infrastructure, in transports, in schools, etc. So yes, to reply to Sabine about Central Hill, of course, I'm against demolition in that specific case. Now, if we move on to the second questions, which was about the consequence of COVID and do we need more developments?
Well, when I moved to London 20 years ago, you may have gathered that I'm French originally. I have a British passport though. So when I moved 20 years ago, the main issue for London was the housing crisis. 20 years on, nothing has changed. The main issue for London is the housing crisis. Nothing's been delivered really. And we need more council housing. We need more affordable housing, but we need more housing full stop. So I do think that, yes, despite COVID, we need more housing in London.
Florence, can I stop you there? You've had 3 minutes. Unfortunately, Grace has kind of seems to have dropped out of the call, so I'm keeping time. But thank you so much for your answers. Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to Claire Shepherd from the Green Party.
Hello, hello, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. I can hear you loud and clear, Claire. Thank you.
Fantastic success. Well, this is one of those areas where I know this is a radical housing network, but this is just party policy for the Green Party. We absolutely recognise the reality which Sabine mentioned about the climate emergency. Whatever budget shortfalls there are, that's our top priority. We absolutely believe that a Green Mayor would put together comprehensive policies to cut down on the carbon impact of material turnover in refurbishing and building new buildings. Tim, and who would have thunk I would have agreed with the Tory, but I do. We do need to look at what materials are being used in new developments. But more than that, and it was lovely to see Drina. I met Drina a few months ago, and she's an absolute community stalwart. And she's been driven to the end of her tether by the works that have been going on at South Lambeth. I'm not surprised. The dust, the noise, the inconsideration for the tenants and the who are there already, you know, for access to their property, even at that level, isn't being considered by the council. It's absolutely not being considered. As Greens, we believe that there should be standards so embodied carbon is reported and reduced. We want whole life's carbon emission impact assessed at application stage. And we want to make it easier for people to build and retrofit in a more carbon effective way. We can't carry on as we've been carrying on, budget shortfalls or no. We can't just keep doing the same old thing and expecting different results. We need to build with materials that have less impact on the environment, and we have to consider the huge environmental impact, getting rid of something like Central Hill Estate, which again I've visited recently. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Florence. It's a beautifully designed estate, but it's made of an awful lot of concrete. And we all know what the embodied levels of carbon are going to be there. They're going to be huge. So there's absolutely no way that should be demolished. Green Mayor would all demolitions, we'd look at all demolitions and see if there's a better way of doing it, working with the communities there, because nobody knows these communities better than the people who live there. They will know what they need, what they want, and they should be listened to. And it's a fact that, you know, whatever the budget shortfalls are, whatever the budget shortfalls are going to be, we need fresh thinking on this. We need new ideas. We need what the mainstream may call radical to become the mainstream.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you so much. Grace, are you back with us?
Hi, yes, I'm really sorry, I got disconnected. Is that just the first round of questions? We finished?
Yep.
I'm really sorry, I missed your contributions there. Okay, moving seamlessly on to our next set of questions, which is on the question of redevelopment, and particularly the planning and development around the Southwark borough.
Grace,
so
I
we
just
have
want
a
to stop.
question.
Grace, just want to stop you there. Marina's got her hand up. I don't know. Is it a quick point, Marina? We've got, yeah. Grace, what do you want?
Yeah, sorry.
Marina, to give Marina a chance to just make a quick point,
Sorry, was
or
this?
do you want to move on?
Sorry, the reason I'm asking is because at the beginning, Grace, you said that we might have a chance to come back on and respond to this. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that my colleagues on the panel have said.
Okay,
Is that
no,
possible
bear with me.
Very briefly.
Sorry, Marina, just bear with me because what we'll do is at the very end, we'll give everybody a right of reply on everything. If you feel like there was something you really needed to say and you didn't get the opportunity, but I just want to keep going with some of the questions so we don't get stuck on one topic and we do get covered. But obviously there's overlap, so you might get a chance to come back again. Sorry. So if I could just ask Hannah, can we have Hannah's video, Claudia? Her question, I think she's prepared a little presentation. It's very short, but it's a very good presentation as part of her question. So.
Despite the majority of residents objecting, in May 2019 a development was passed through planning on Southernwood Retail Park for a 48-storey monstrosity, which then paved the way for every other application for a tall building in the Old Kent Road area. Since then, three things have changed: COVID, the climate emergency, and the indefinite hold on the Bakerloo line extension. The development plans are all based on the GLA being delivered at the same time as the first phase of development being finished. The development is 3.5 times the maximum density for a normal urban zone. It will cast a shadow over the park, it's totally out of context with the existing buildings, and will destroy 15 trees, including an 80-year-old tree. It only just provides the 35% required social housing, if you calculate it using the habitable rooms, and the majority is scheduled to be delivered in the second phase of the development, which is at least 4 years after the first phase is finished. So, about 8 to 10 years from now. This is just one of many developments opposed by residents. So my question is this: would the candidates pledge to re-evaluate and replan for environmentally sustainable, lower density, less tall developments? Or will they leave developers to strip the borough of its heritage, leave ugly builds and a deficit in infrastructure? Thank you.
Okay, so I think that was a pretty comprehensive question. We've got another linked question though from Santiago, a trader in the Elephant Shopping Centre. If you want to cue his video, Claudia.
Yep, I'm just going to share that now.
Hello, my name is Santiago Pelufo Soneira. I am co-director at Latin Elephant, a local charity based in South London, campaigning for an inclusive development in Elephant and Castle. I have two questions for the candidates. Number one, how will you ensure that all concessions and gains to the Elephant and Castle redevelopment scheme will be properly scrutinized and monitored so that gains already promised and secured remain untouched for the community? Number two, can we get your commitment to work with displaced traders still without a space and help us find money to rehouse them in the area after Southwark Council committed to an alternative market, albeit no funding? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So there's two issues there, but it's around the regeneration around Old Kent Road and the Elephant and Castle. So if the candidates could try to address both, I know you haven't got lots of time, but I'm going to start with Tim Briggs on this round of questions. You got 3 minutes, Tim, to try and address those questions.
I knew you were going to ask me this one, which I know very little about first, because it's in Southwark. But I know there's been issues around Elephant and Castle, but I mean, it sounds to me, these are GLA candidates. I'm standing in for the Conservative GLA candidate, but it sounds to me like this is an issue with Southwark Council. I mean, it's a private development, as I understand it. It's a private development which has been approved by Southwark Council. It seems to have some of the issues attached to it that have popped up elsewhere, which are to do with the mayor, this particular mayor's, Sadiq Khan's London plan, which is basically to build as much sort of as many high-rise buildings as possible, as quickly as possible. I mean, so the questions were: can you pledge to replan for less tall, or allow developers to pledge to replan for less tall buildings, I think that Hannah's question was, would you pledge to plan for less tall buildings? Well, I know that within Sean Bailey's manifesto, he's talking about banning inappropriate tower blocks, and this sounds completely inappropriate, but I don't know enough about it to say anything definitive. And as I say, it sounds like it's a Southwark Council issue. And of course, the issue with Southwark Council is you've got too many Labour councillors, not enough local democracy, not enough councillors there to be able to challenge them. Because so, you know, in a sense that you know, I can't complain about people voting for who they want to vote for in Southwark, but the problems stem from having too many of the same Labour councillors, I would suggest. Santiago's question was about concessions and gains. Have the concessions and gains been properly scrutinised regarding the development? And I would say that was an issue for Southwark Council. Again, issues with democracy that we've seen with the way that you know, council estates are being demolished, you know, low traffic neighbourhoods being implemented by councils that you know, appear not to be listening to communities. And he also asked about traders without a space, how could they be relocated? And I remember talking to a trader, a Colombian guy actually about 2 or 3 years ago, who was saying that his restaurant was going to be obviously closed as a result of the current shopping centre being closed. And what could he do? And I said, I genuinely, I don't know. I don't know, my friend, because this is a Southwark Council project. And I don't, you know, how can they be rehoused? I mean, I would just go to your local councillors, ask them to write to the cabinet member for housing and say, look, you know, can you please try and help these traders to relocate? And I'm not sure what else can be done. I mean, certainly in terms of the mayor's powers and what the mayor can do. Sorry, what? You look.
Yeah, I was going to let you round up there if that's okay, Tim.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
just to bear in mind that all of these planning decisions that people are asking you about, they do get a final sign off from the mayor.
Yeah.
But I'm going to move on to the next candidate to respond on these questions. That's Florence Zero. So you've got 3 minutes, Florence, if you want to tell us what the Lib Dems would do. Thanks. Just don't forget to unmute. Florence, you need to unmute.
Right, okay,
Great.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, so to reply to the first question about the 1,000 retail park and high rise. Okay, so now there is scientific evidence that high rise buildings are not energy efficient. I've read articles published by UCL professors saying that high-rise buildings are not energy efficient. So I really don't understand why now we're building that many high-rise blocks everywhere, all across London. They cast shadows, they use a lot of energy to be maintained. And of course, there's a very low quality of life for people living in tower blocks. We know this. On top of this, we have a security issue for residents. I would like to talk briefly about the fire brigade. We know what happened. We know that the fire brigade is underfunded. We know that there are not that many aerial appliances, and those aerial appliances are the big ladders that can go up to high-rise buildings. So at the moment, the mayor is building so many high-rise all over London, but there's no way to protect them against fire, because the fire brigade is underfunded. So I think that's quite shocking. We densify, we buy high rise everywhere. There's damage to community, there's an environmental damage, but also there's potential damage to residents' lives. And I think we never talk about this, and we should talk about this more. Now, about what Santiago said on the Elephant and Castle development, yes, traders, I'm very well aware of the dilemma and well, the tragedy that traders have there, because I used to buy very nice bracelets from the Latin American community in Elephant and Castle, and I know that they've been squeezed out. Is that fair? How is that fair? How are we going to relocate them? I think, is that what the council should be doing? Just pushing business out when we really need more businesses? We really need those businesses to go on and of course to offer employment to people. So there's all of the community damage, the damage on businesses that I'm really worried about, the damage on people. And yes, I think that this has not been well thought through. And also what I wanted to say is that those two developments, Old Kent Road and Elephant and Castle, architecturally are ugly buildings. I'm sorry to say this, but it's ugly. We're in London. London is the best capital city in the world. It's an amazing city. It's beautiful everywhere. And now, what are we doing? We're just destroying this beautiful city with ugly blocks.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Should we
I
leave
really
it on?
don't understand this.
Okay, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you, Florence. And I'm going to call Claire to tell us what the Green Party would do about the Old Kent Road development. And you've got 3 minutes, Claire.
Hello there. I'm actually based in Southwark. I'm a Peckham girl, so I'm fully aware of what's going on the Old Kent Road and in Elephant and Castle. And yeah, it's poor that these developments have been waved through. Very much in the Green Party, a lot of our policy, and I hope some of you take the time to read our manifesto because it's magnificent. There's some really great fresh thinking in there, is to revisit this kind of plan. As I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten the Old Kent Road campaigner's name. I should have written it down. But as she said, a lot of social housing there is kind of pushed into the later stage of the development, and that's a common theme with an awful lot of the mistakes that we believe the current mayor has made in using the affordable grant money available that's been devolved from the national government. He's moving too slowly, he's kicking it too far down the line. It's in later stages of developments when what we need is housing now. We need that money to be spent on social housing now, and actual social housing, not, you know, affordable homes, which, as we all know, are not, you know, truly social housing is what is demanded by the capital. The size of the developments, I mean, it's especially when you look around the Old Kent Road, a building that tall is ridiculous. I mean, at one point that development also featured an alligator tank, just to show you how nuts some of the planning for that was. That's not going to happen now, thank God. But yeah, there's a lot of schemes like this, and you take it over to Lambeth, it's a similar situation with the massive tower that's going up there. We're expecting in second of the 20-story tower to go up there. And Tim, again, is right. It is because there's not a lot of opposition. In Southwark, there's much less opposition, but there's a council election next year, so let's hope that changes fairly quickly. Because in Lambeth, I can see in there in a little box that you've got great Green councillors like Pete Elliott who do stand against the kind of thing and stand with the community. And the whole thing with the Green Party is we think that London is for communities. It's not for corporations to decide how our community land is used. It should be for the communities themselves. So our policy is, you know, to actually listen to people, which again shouldn't be radical, but apparently somehow is. And what we're hoping is that this will encourage planning developments that will be coming from the ground up, as it were, from the people up, because it's us who makes London, not the businesses, it's people like us. And
thanks, Claire.
I thought that was about 3 minutes. I was like, should I say something else? No, 3 minutes.
No, that was 3 minutes. So shall we leave it on that note? And I'm going to ask Marina Ahmed to respond for the Labour Party now. Do you want to unmute, Marina?
Right, can you hear me now? Sorry, last year it was.
Yes, I can hear you.
Wasn't it? You're on mute, and it looks like it will be this year as well. So basically, the issue around tall buildings, it is an issue. We know that it's an issue. What I can say is that in the manifesto that's been launched by the mayor in the last couple of weeks, there is absolutely a commitment to look at the mix of the types of buildings, and that if there are inappropriate tall buildings in planning, that they will be looked at. Now, I think in Lambeth, for example, the Hondo Tower issue has been ongoing. It has now been called in by the mayor. So that, you know, that's not an empty promise. It is being discussed, and it will be discussed, and a proper investigation will take place into whether that's an appropriate building there. I know what local residents think. With regard to scrutiny, I think it's really easy for anybody to say, yeah, look, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. Actually, the proof comes afterwards, and what happens afterwards, and whether those commitments and those promises that have been made are actually followed through. And I'm afraid too often that doesn't happen. And I think, you know, that's parties and councils and governments of all hues, that doesn't happen. And I would want to ensure that proper scrutiny is made of those decisions, because that is people's livelihoods and their lifestyles that we're talking about. And also working with displaced traders. If I were to be elected on the 6th of May, I would be more than happy to come and meet with you. It's an area that I was in actually just last Thursday. Unfortunately, didn't have time to actually do what I wanted to do, which was come and talk to you. I was on the Walworth Road doing other things. But yes, of course, if there's the possibility of doing that, I'd be more than happy to do that if I'm elected on the 6th of May. But just picking up on two of my panel colleagues, Tim, absolutely astonished that where you think that there are too many Labour councillors because they've been democratically voted in. Little point of order, we actually live in the City of London here, not in downtown Myanmar somewhere. And Florence, you talk about cutting all the various services and what you worry about that and emergency services. Can I point out that an awful lot of those cuts happened when you were in coalition with the Tories, and then they followed that through after they made sure that you weren't in coalition with them. So please do take responsibility for some of the decisions that you've made. I don't have anything else to say, so we can move on if you want.
Hello? Sorry, I don't know if you got cut off there, Marina, or if you'd finished. Thank you for that. We can move on to the next round of questions, which it was touched on the last issue about fire safety. And we have a question which has been sent by Deborah on that. Do you want to cue that one up, Claudia?
Yep, will do.
The pictures seem to be frozen on the screen now. I don't know if that's just me or if that's everybody. But hopefully we can see the video.
After the Grenfell tragedy, many more buildings have been found to have fire safety issues like flammable cladding and other defects. Government hasn't yet provided any viable solutions to this, and there's no clarity about who should be responsible. In the meantime, those of us who live in flats like these are facing ongoing safety issues and serious financial uncertainties. My neighbours and I are caught up in this. Our building's under 18 metres tall, and many of us own as little as 30% of our flats. Our building has suspected fire safety issues, but we don't yet know full details, when it'll be made safe, or who's going to have to pay. The uncertainty is disrupting our professional and personal plans. For example, we can't sell our flats to move on, and it affects our mental health. What do candidates plan to do to support local leaseholders like us caught up in the building safety crisis?
Okay, thanks, Deborah. That was really clear, and I think that Kenneth O'Keefe, if he's here, if he wants to unmute, he had a question on a similar topic that would be good to take now.
Very good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, candidates. The leasehold scandal and End Our Cladding scandal are campaigns that are deeply affecting millions of leaseholders, particularly in London. And on Tuesday, MPs will be voting again on the fire safety bill amended in the House of Lords to prevent any leaseholders or tenants having to pay costs of cladding and building failings. Will you and your party use your influence to publicly call for developers such as Ballymore Group to fulfill their responsibilities to residents and fully fund the remediation of existing buildings and safety defects? And if you are elected on the 6th of May, what does practical action look like in your support of local leaseholders impacted by the building safety crisis and costs?
That's brilliant. Thank you, Kenneth. I'm going to ask the candidates to come back on those questions now. My screen has gone funny again. I hope people can hear me. I'm going to ask Florence to start this time to tell us what she's going to do practically to support leaseholders and residents and tenants worried about fire safety at the moment. So, Florence, do you want to unmute and speak for 3 minutes?
I live in a new built estate, and it was actually finished in 2018, and there are still cladding issues with it. So I'm one of the leaseholders, unfortunately, who have to bear this uncertainty. Nobody in my building at the moment can sell their flat because the remedial work has still not been carried out. I think this is a scandal. Honestly, Grenfell was a tragedy, a disaster, and cost lives. And it's utterly unacceptable in a city like London to see such tragedies. And now, what we're going through is some sort of limbo about new regulations, and there's a cost attached to it, and nobody wants to foot the bill. Well, that's not okay. That's not okay at all. You cannot make up new regulations and then ask people, residents, to pay for it. It doesn't make any sense. This does not happen anywhere else in the world. This needs to be sorted out by central government. And of course, it's, I think, the work of MPs to push for this, but there's no way that leaseholders should pay or should have to undergo all those costs. I've heard that some people have actually to pay for security costs, private security costs for their building. I mean, I can't imagine seeing this in any other capital city. It should not be the case. And of course, the Lib Dems will fight to make sure that all costs are paid by central government, but not by residents and not by leaseholders. So I hope I have been clear on this, but I'm quite passionate about this because it affects everybody. It affects me as well.
Okay, thank you, Florence. That was really clear. Can we have a response from Claire Shepherd for 3 minutes on this issue?
Thank you, Grace.
Thanks.
I'm on mute. Similarly, the Green Party absolutely stands with Grenfell survivors. We want justice for Grenfell. We want to see people prosecuted, those responsible for putting people's lives in danger. And it's absolutely scandalous that so many Londoners are still living in that danger. Social housing tenants trapped in dangerous housing, leaseholders. I mean, you could hear in voice the anxiety that this has given her. Where you've got shared ownership, that's often kind of clarified the position that those people are living in an untenable, unaffordable situation. They don't have the benefits of owning the property, but apparently they get all the bills, even through something that's absolutely not their fault and they wouldn't have known about. The Greens, we believe that the Building Safety Fund must cover all building regulations, regardless of how tall they are, and not just for cladding, for internal defects as well. A Green Mayor will make sure that all residents of London could monitor the risk within their building. There should be a searchable database so you can find out, what risks there are in buying a place, whether there are major works coming up, whether there are fire risks there. And again, coming back to a point that I seem to keep making, but it's a very important point. Listen to residents. I don't think if anyone's been following the Grenfell inquest this week, anyone who's experienced dealing with local councils could identify with the experience that people were saying for years in Grenfell. they were flagging problems. For years, they were ignored. For years, they were treated as an inconvenience or troublemakers if they complained about issues of basic safety. That is abhorrent. That should be, you know, that shouldn't even be something that happens. We shouldn't be threatening people who are waving flags and saying, I live in a dangerous home. Never. That shouldn't happen. And it happens time and time again with council tenants, leaseholders. I'm a leaseholder in a sort. So, you know, I know as many of you do, how powerless you can feel when faced with that.
Thank you, Claire.
So
I think that's
yeah,
been a really
I'm
good
all
point
for
well
the
made.
troublemakers and the whistleblowers, frankly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much on that. And I'm going to ask Marina to finish on this topic. If you can unmute and speak for 3 minutes, Marina, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much. We've heard, you know, how many times can you use the word scandal? It is an utter disgrace that this matter has not been dealt with. It is appalling, and it is absolutely, you know, I think it's an absolute insult to the people who lost their lives at Grenfell that this hasn't, you know, it hasn't been resolved in any of in the ways that it should have done. But you know, let's just go back in history a little bit. Closer to home, Lacknell House in Southwark in 2009, 6 people died because of cladding issues. And I was reading through the coroner's report. What really I found really quite chilling was in the coroner's report, she actually outlined that it was cladding. She talked about the outside envelope of the tower. She's referring to cladding. The lessons weren't learnt then, and they still don't seem to be learnt now. And basically, it is the government's responsibility. And the government needs to find the developers. And if there is an issue with those developers who have collapsed, then we need to look at our laws as to what happens when a developer doesn't exist anymore. Who actually then foots the bill? And that means that there needs to be something done in terms of legislation to ensure that that can be covered. But at this moment in time, it is the government who needs to deal with this. And it's not fair that leaseholders are having to worry so much about what's happening. In terms of the, it's not just, also, can we just talk about, I mean, we touched on waking watchers as well. Waking watchers at the moment, the government finally released a £30 million grant to cover the bill for waking watchers. So basically the people who are employed to stay awake all night to ensure that if there's a fire, that everyone can get out their property. In London, it's for those properties and those households who need that kind of service. On average, it costs £256 per week per household for that. £30 million is not going to cover it. It doesn't even go anywhere near covering the issue. The fire safety bill, going back to the second question, so I'm really worried about this because I think this is a potential missed opportunity in terms of something very tangible that can be done to ensure that the legislation is in place, first of all, to make our buildings as safe as possible, but also to ensure that the issues are covered not by the leaseholders, who are actually who really are not the people who should be paying for this, and it's completely unreasonable to expect them to do that. But fine, also within that, we've got the building safety bill that's just about to be introduced as well. Again, another piece of government legislation that is not dealing with very pertinent issues where we've had tragic effects because those issues were not dealt with. This is government, and government needs to deal with this.
Okay, thanks, Marina. I made a mistake there. There's another, we have to call Tim on this issue as well. And just on the questions, I appreciate that some of these issues are issues that the government should and is responsible for. But if candidates can speak in terms of how they will use their position on the GLA, then that would also be very useful for people at this Hustings. Okay, so Tim, you've got 3 minutes to respond on these issues about fire.
I think Grace may have frozen.
I was sitting on a corporate committee in Lambeth, and someone came in front of us to do with housing management, and I asked him fire safety because it occurred to me that there had been no proper fire safety assessments of all the Lambeth stock. And the officers all started kind of moving uncomfortably in their seats, and they clearly hadn't done any of the regular annual fire safety assessments that they were supposed to do. And then, of course, we had Grenfell, I think it was in the summer of 2017, wasn't it? So I made a big fuss about that. They then diverted all of the money for repairs into doing fire safety assessments in order to basically, you know, to be able to say they have done fire safety assessments. Didn't mean the properties were safe. It just meant that they had done the assessment, which said in a lot of cases that the properties weren't safe, but they could say, oh, we've done all our fire safety. I mean, that is how poorly managed, you know, housing is in local authorities like Lambeth. Wandsworth, on the other hand, as soon as Grenfell happened, they retrofitted all of their properties, all of their high-rise properties with sprinklers, and they covered the cost themselves. Now, you know, the Labour Council in Lambeth moans about how little money they got, but had they looked after their properties properly, built up reserves, built up a surplus like Wandsworth did, then they would have had the money to retrofit the properties and look after their tenants. I mean, I always say that Lambeth is it's the worst rogue landlord in Lambeth is Lambeth Council, because they're the largest landlord in Lambeth, and they consistently, you know, manage their properties poorly. There will be a review about tighter regulations of fire safety. There will be legislation coming forward. I mean, Grenfell was I don't know anyone who wasn't, you know, utterly moved and appalled by what happened. And I don't think the blame is as simple as saying, oh, you know, it's this person's. I mean, clearly there are a lot of issues in play here. But the one good thing I think that will come out of Grenfell will be that there will be tighter fire safety regulations in relation to taller buildings. You know, whether we can argue about whether those are sufficient or whether they should be retrofitted, or, you know, to what extent, but you know, there's a greater focus on fire safety now after that, and that can only be a good thing for everyone. In relation to leaseholders, I mean, look, people have worked hard to pay for the leases for their properties, and it seems very easy to say, well, the government should pay, but actually, if the government, there's no such thing as government money. It's only taxpayers' money. So what you're saying is actually, well, I think people on lower incomes who don't own property should pay a contribution towards the money that leaseholders should get. You know, I mean, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but this is what central government has to look at. They have to look at the balance. It's it's a very Labour thing. It's a very left-wing thing to say, to punish people on lower incomes and say, oh, actually, should give your money to these people that own their own properties. To compensate. So the question really is, who pays? You know, who pays? And I think it's the freeholders who should pay the developer. And I think they should borrow against the value of their properties. And I think the government should help them to do that. I think the government should contribute a small amount, should set in place legislation to make sure that the developers pay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Thank you for. We like to hear controversial positions as well as crowd pleasers. So the next question we're going to move on to in terms of the topic is a really another huge issue which we're trying to rush through, but is a whole question of temporary housing and people living in private housing. So we have a video from Davida, who's in temporary housing in Lambeth at the moment, and Claudia, could you put that on for us? And then that will be followed by another video of Daniela, another temporary housing resident in the borough.
As homeless households are moved in between multiple temporary accommodation schemes that are run down and in poor condition, long term they persevere without rights to live securely or settle. How will you champion for your boroughs as an example for London to prioritise secure homes for homeless households without worrying about incentivising homelessness? With numerous accounts publicised, temporary accommodation, either council-run or low-end private rental market, homes are run down, neglected and poorly maintained. Do you encourage introducing prosecutions or fines for the local councils to urge better practice and stop households being subjected to inhumane conditions they have no control over?
Okay, thank you, Davida. And Claudia, do you want to play Daniela's video as well? Again, a personal story, somebody living in temporary housing.
If you're in temporary accommodation, you find that you get little rights taken away from you, and your standards of living are different compared to somebody that is in permanent residency. And then the council are able to get away with this because then effectively you don't really have the same rights as somebody else. So therefore your living conditions can be lower, and all of this you have to be grateful for, because otherwise you would be on the streets, which I think is unfair, because if it's not okay for one set, then it shouldn't be for somebody else, because we're all human beings and we all have the same needs. I'm not the only one who have been on the housing list for a long time. I do consider 6 years to be on a housing list to be quite a long time. Well, the difference is that you're not stable, so you never have a stable address. You don't know, like I'm going to work, and if, for instance, if they called me and said that I have to move, then that's what I have to do, no regard for my son's schooling, where I'm working or anything. So you don't actually, I haven't had a life for 6 years. The way I look at it, it's a private organisation running on social money, and the two don't work. So this is why there's the issues that there is. And I think coming away from it all is I realised how horrible humanity could be, because essentially it is an organisation, but it's made up of people, and somebody else can tell me what they feel that it's good enough to live in, and half these things are not good enough to live in, and nobody would want to live that way. And at this present moment, animals have more rights than me and my son. So, you know, what do you say to that?
Claudia, shall we play Alison's video as well? It does link to these questions about the conditions that people are living, particularly in private accommodation, whether they're placed there as temporary housing by the council or just because that's the only accommodation they can find. And Alison sent us a question just about the conditions she's living in private rented. So Claudia, do you want to put her video on as well? And then we'll ask all the candidates to respond to all of them.
Sure, just sharing that now.
Sorry for the dodgy look and the attire, but it's 3:28, I think, AM, and I've just been woken up by the sound of, well, people having sex. This is my bedroom. My sitting room is there, and it's in the adjacent block. It's not even in this block where I live. So I'm asking what are candidates going to do for people who live in social housing and they've been constructed in what must be the construction term for paper. The level of noise I can hear is just ridiculous. I can tell you what my neighbour watches on a Sunday. My neighbour underneath me, he watches Songs and Praise, I think at 11:35. I can hear my other neighbours do their washing at 11:30 p.m. I can hear my other neighbour who does his exercise routine at 5 a.m. My other neighbour who does DIY all the time, and my other neighbours in the other block having daytime parties all the way through COVID.
Sorry, I don't know if people could hear all of that clearly, but the question that Alison sent by text as well, I'll read it out just in case people missed the video. So what will candidates do to advocate for residents in social housing who live in properties with mold, condensation, no proper soundproofing or insulation? People are being driven mad by living in properties that have paper thin walls. So just it's about the conditions in which people are living, whether it's in private or social or council owned. So I'll put these questions to the candidates to respond to, and I'm going to ask Claire to start us on this round. If you want to unmute and speak for 3 minutes, Claire.
Hello, again, familiar face there. Hi, Davida. How you doing? Thanks for welcoming me to Denby Court the other week to meet you, and I think was Kerry there as well. Hi, Kerry. Thank you for telling us your story. I went home from meeting you with the fire from 100 suns in my stomach. I'm in awe of the work that you do there. And for those of you who are not familiar, the temporary accommodation situation there is appalling. There are mice, there is mold, there is leaks, there is electricity coming through, there is rotten windows, there's an insecure security system, there's 9-inch nails in the garden. I didn't forget a bit of it, and I will never forget it. I don't understand how any councillor in Lambeth who visited that site thinks that that is any way reasonable to leave people living in those situations for years on end. Again, this is a situation where if you complain about the situation, and you could hear that from Danielle's video, then you're feeling even more insecure about your situation. It's beyond wrong. We need to get more accommodation, get people out of temporary housing. A Green Mayor would rapidly expand and fund the London Council's Capital Letters programme, I remember, and get loans from landlords at reasonable rates. We're paying high costs through councils to often substandard, nightly paid temporary accommodation. It's not good enough. We need to dramatically increase our housing stock of low-cost rented homes by purchasing existing homes with the GLA using grants and sustainable borrowing to buy homes from existing stock. Landlords, developers, buy back right to buy. Bring that back into the social housing stock, because quite a lot of that social housing stock is actually being privately leased back to people. So people have less rights as tenants because they're private tenants. There's also loopholes with property guardians, which is another kind of crap rented accommodation system that's been allowed to flourish. With your candidates from the Green Party, you've got Sian Berry, our candidate for mayor, who is a private renter. She's more than familiar, as we all are, with crap landlords. My personal story is my last landlord removed my living room floor because it was rotten. I couldn't get to the kitchen and bathroom because they were on the other side of the living room floor. We've lived these problems. We've experienced these problems. Zach Polanski is a property guardian as well. We really want to listen, we really want to make things better, and we're prepared to do things that other parties might say, oh no, we can't do that, to make it happen for people. Because you're right, you wouldn't leave an animal living in some of these situations. It's not good enough that people are being forced into overcrowded, unsafe situations and being told that that will do, because it will not do. It will not do. And I do not understand how anyone can visit these situations and then go home and sleep in their nice, warm, safe bed at night and not have nightmares about it. Because I've thought about you every single day, Sunday. That's what I would say.
No, thank you, Claire. That was really good, and it's good to hear specific policies being put forward of what you would do in Power. So hopefully the other candidates will follow in that suit, and we can hear from Marina Ahmed about what the Labour Party would do on this issue. You want to unmute and speak for 3 minutes?
Thank you, Grace. No one can hear what those three women have just told us and not be touched by it. It is absolutely horrific. I'm sick of going into people's house. As a councillor, the biggest issue in my inbox was always about housing issues, and it was about repairs, and it was about the conditions that people lived in. And I remember going into a house and there was mold growing on the woolen shoes that she'd, because the floor was wet, she'd lifted them up onto a cabinet, and the mold was still on the shoes because of the level of condensation in that property. Nobody nobody should in this country, well, nowhere, but in the 5th richest economy in the world, should live in that kind of condition. And I think that Daniela actually made the point that about almost people being regarded as second-class citizens, not being entitled to the same kind of conditions that other people are entitled to. It is unacceptable from how properties from privately rented landlords or from councils of any political hue. I grew up in a council house, and I had that safety and security of a council house. And I was lucky enough to live in an area where if there was an issue, the council would come and fix it. But that was a very long time ago. What we need to address is the fact that this happens because there is an acute crisis in the housing sector. There is an acute shortage of properties for people to live in. And unfortunately, with the predictions for the growth of the population of London, which very soon will start increasing by about 70,000 per year, that unless we start addressing it and really addressing it, then that's going to be a problem. The mayor already has started doing that. Since 1983, Sadiq Khan has built more council properties in the time that he has already been in power than properties that were built since 1983. We have already started that. The process and a second term for Sadiq Khan will ensure that that carries on, and the target of 10,000 more properties to be built in just in the next couple of years is well on target at the moment. All the issues that he agreed with government have all been resolved, and he's ticked every box in terms of that. So that is happening, but properties take time to build. We know that. Just the other issue around here, of course, is empty homes. We need to look at the issue of empty homes. And whilst, so in Southwark, I know the guess at the moment, because it is difficult to judge because it's to do with council tax receipts. In Southwark at the moment, we think it's approximately just over 3,000 empty homes. There is an issue, and there is a very strong case that legislation needs to take place, because at the moment, if a property is empty, it takes it takes almost 2.5 years before enforcement action can happen, and that needs to be much quicker, because it's absolutely criminal that there are so many empty properties in London and in this constituency, in Lambeth and Southwark, and they're not being able to be brought back because of legislative issues.
Okay, thank you, Marina. That's a good note to leave that topic on for you, and then I'll ask Tim to come on the same issue if you'd like to tell us what the Conservatives would do for temporary housing residents.
Yeah, so I mean, temporary accommodation is a local authority issue, and poor standard of temporary accommodation. And in some ways, temporary accommodation is slightly outside of the court system, because you don't have the same rights as even private rented sector tenants if you're living in temporary accommodation. And of course, a lot of these properties which are provided for temporary accommodation by landlords are really substandard, are really poor. And of course, the council licenses them effectively to the tenants, and they license them with. So if the council wanted the properties to be better standards, they could, but they don't, because they don't care, because there's no incentive, there's no political pressure from the Labour councillors. In my Conservative local authority manifesto in 2018, we put forward a proposal for ending street homelessness by ending temporary accommodation by building lots of pop-up homes, which have been built in all sorts of places from Ealing, Reading, Dublin, Lewisham, and they're very comfortable, sort of, very high standard of fittings, of warm, comfortable modular apartments. And the proposal was to spend 2 million building these, just 60 units to start with, and that would save about $1 million a year, just under $1 million a year, because you take people out of these awful properties which are used for temporary accommodation. In terms of they're not, I mean, the basic problem is that there's not enough properties being built. And for my Labour colleague to say, oh, Sadiq Khan, he's just starting and he's getting, I mean, look, the guy's been there 5 years, I mean, the issue with Sadiq Khan, how many, let me just find it, how many So he's only going to build between 2021 to 26, 35,000 new affordable homes. He's had a 4 billion grant from government and he still hasn't done anything basically. And he talks about the starts of homes and, oh, it's going to take a while. But, you know, he's really, really he hasn't built the homes that people need. And he's done a really bad job. And of course, it's everyone else's fault, no doubt. But the one thing he can't say is that he hasn't been given the money from government, because he has. He's been given over 4 billion and he's still got over 4 billion sitting in a fund waiting for these things to be built. Regarding empty homes, and it's for the council to enforce that there should. I mean, Sean Bailey's manifesto talks about crackdown on empty homes. He says there's 22,000 in London, but it's for local authorities like Southwark and Lambeth can issue empty dwelling management orders in order to bring, and they can purchase these properties. They can bring them back into use, but they choose not to. So, I mean, again, you know, as I said before, you know, I can't fault the good people of Lambeth for voting to have lots of Labour councillors, but you get what you vote for at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And I'd advise the candidates to keep an eye on the chat. There's some very strong reactions coming to some of the things that you're saying, so you might want to look at those in terms of how you're responding in the next round of questions as well. Florence, could you speak in terms of what the Liberal Democrats would do on this issue for 3 minutes? Thank you.
Well, there have been very good points made by Claire and Tim, so thank you very much for those. I think that the videos we've seen were quite frightening, and it's sad to see that in such a rich city, London is one of the richest cities in the world, you have temporary homes in conditions where you have mold and mice. I mean, this is completely unheard of, and it's devastating to see that in London we are still at that level. So I think, yes, it is the local council responsibility to do the maintenance work in temporary homes and in council homes, and they should be made responsible for this. They should be held into account for fulfilling their responsibilities. And this is why we have a democracy. Is thanks to democracy, we can vote and we can hold elected officials into account for what they have not delivered. So there are also regulations about noise and noise levels in accommodation. And again, I think it is the responsibility of the local council to enforce the regulations and maintain homes so that regulations are implemented. So this is about living conditions. Now, about the question of social housing, I had a look about what happened in the past, and I read that in the early 80s, 35% of all accommodation in London, all households, were socially rented, 35% in the early 80s. Now it's down to 22%. So I think that this doesn't make sense, because we don't want people with low income to be squeezed out. We need people with low income. Key workers, unfortunately, very often have low income and they can't afford privately owned homes. So we need to provide council housing for such people. And I mean, the level, 35% was about right in the 80s. Why did it go down to 22%? We still have more than 35% key workers, and we do need, we've seen in the recent situation that we're going through, how much key workers are essential to our communities and to our economy and to everybody. So we need to make sure that we have enough social housing being built. Again, it is the responsibility of the mayor and of local authorities. And as a GLA candidate, of course, I will lobby and I will, you know, as a GLA candidate, London Assembly members can vote the budget that the mayor proposes. So they can vote against it as well. So there's scrutiny. This is what the London Assembly is doing, is scrutiny over what the Mayor of London is proposing. So actually, the London Assembly is very powerful. And as a London Assembly member, I will scrutinize the budgets and make sure that enough social housing are maintained and built.
Okay, thank you, Florence. That was, we were going to have another round of questions. We're coming to what is going to be the end of, we were hoping to finish by 3:30. There was 2 more questions that people had asked. If I ask those people to ask their questions, I think that will cover all the topics that we did want to cover today. And then when I ask the candidates to respond, they could maybe refer to those questions, but also make their closing remarks so that we finish as soon after 3:30 as we possibly can. So if people are fine, if people think that's okay, can I ask Francis from Fuel Poverty Action to unmute and just ask your question?
Hello, yes.
Is Francis here? Hi, Francis. Thank you.
Thank you. The GLA has been instrumental in forcing developments to bring in district heating in London, with no requirement to take affordability into account. Many people in Lambeth and Southwark are stuck with huge costs and often constant breakdowns, leaving them cold and without hot water for days, weeks, or months. What will the candidates do about that? And will you help ensure that GLA planning requirements don't force more and more residents to live with such disasters?
Thank you, Francis. And again, it's good. I'm going to ask Caitlin if she's here to ask her question, which is also about what planning requirements I think are put on developers in London. Caitlin, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, so I'm asking questions on behalf of the 35% campaign in Southwark. Can everyone hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I have 2 questions. Firstly, since 2004, the proportion of affordable housing delivered on major new developments has fallen steadily from about 50% on average to only about 30%. Southwark now has a strategic target of 50% affordable housing. How would you achieve this target and get the affordable housing back up to 50% and frankly more? Secondly, in 2018 and 2019, Southwark developments delivered only 465 social rented homes, the highest figure since 2011 and 2012, but it still has 14,000 households on its waiting list. What will you do to increase the amount of social rented housing in the borough?
Thank you, Caitlin. And so I'm going to ask, as I say, the candidates to come back, and I'm going to be starting with Marina again. So if I could ask you, when you're responding to these questions, to make this answer your concluding remarks as well, in terms of any issue you felt you didn't get a chance to cover earlier, and hopefully we can get a good sense of what you're offering to the voters in 2 weeks' time. So Marina, do you want to come in and respond and make your closing remarks?
Right, thank you, Grace. So with regard to the district heating issue, it isn't something that I have any level of expertise in, but the aim, of course, is for the heating system to work efficiently. And I'm sorry to hear that that's not happening, and clearly it's not. It's something that needs to be efficient and worthwhile, and actually there for the benefit of the residents rather than something that's causing the issues. And if I am elected on the 6th of May, I'm happy to take that up and look at that and look at and how that can be improved. The 35% issue from Caitlin, basically the issue around housing and about making sure that we have enough properties is something, again, that's universal and is across the board. That has to happen. So if we've got a minimum, if it's going from 30 to 35%, and if we can take it to 50%, then that would of course be something that I would absolutely support. I can't emphasize enough, the crisis of housing in London is something that affects people's lives on every single level. And you look at it in terms of mental health, physical health, you look at what's happening in terms of the economy and their people's ability to work. It is not, it's something that absolutely is integral to people's lives. And if that's something that we can do and improve, then that's what we will. In terms of closing remarks. Just want to pick up on a couple of points that came through previously. I would like to ask the my Liberal Democrat colleague, she's talking about housing regeneration and right in the first question, about how Sutton Council, which has regeneration on its agenda for 10 I'm so sorry. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes,
so
we
going
can hear
back,
you
so
fine, Irene.
can you, sorry, I'm so sorry, things have gone very strange on my screen. Can you actually hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Yep.
fine, Marina.
Okay, thank you. So Sutton Council at the moment have 10 estate regeneration schemes in the pipeline. I'm assuming that, given the comments that she made, that they will all be retrofitted, because if that's a policy, then that's a policy, as opposed to doing anything else with them. Tim, going back to your issues around democracy, really interesting. I think and also just some of the facts and figures that you just quoted, absolute fantasy, just as they've come out of the fantasy book that is Sean Bailey, the Tory candidate's for mayor, his actual manifesto, which is absolutely low on detail but very high on fantasy figures. So nice to see that you've actually been reading that and taken a leaf from that. So the final thing that I would like to say is that this mayor is the only mayor that so far that will absolutely push, and the only candidate that will make sure that housing needs are being met and addressed, as he has been right from the start, as opposed to the previous mayor who emphasised actually building luxury flats, penthouse apartments. This mayor is looking at social housing and ensuring that people in London have a decent home to live in. I think that's my 3 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marina. I give you a bit of leeway there because it was your closing remark, so a bit of extra time. But thank you very much for that. And I'm going to ask the Conservative candidate to unmute, Tim. And just say people in the chat are asking if the copy of the chat can be sent to the candidates afterwards, in case they didn't get a chance to see the reactions to their comments. So definitely we can do that. We're going to be sharing the whole Hustings video online, and we're going to be sharing the chat and any follow-up issues. So go ahead, Tim.
Can I say, Grace, I didn't really understand or hear properly the question about district heating. Do you want to just quickly summarise what it was?
Shall I say it again, quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
So the GLA has been instrumental in
the development. Francis, sorry, go ahead, Francis, read it out again.
Yeah, so the GLA has pushed district heating in London. There isn't a requirement in London to take affordability into account. So there are a lot of people in Lambeth and Southwark stuck with huge costs, lots of breakdowns, cold and without hot water for days, weeks or months. What will the candidates do about that? And will you help ensure that planning requirements don't force more people into those situations? I'll put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, no, that's thank you. That's really helpful. So I mean, I have come across this. I mean, in terms of fuel poverty is what you're talking about, and how some of these new developments, particularly the ones planned by Lambeth, don't account for fuel costs in the affordability projections that they make for the new tenants and so on. I mean, I presume that's a local authority issue, but in terms of planning, GLA planning, I have to admit I don't know enough about it to be able to say anything meaningful about that. But I am aware of the problem, and I am aware that that's an issue within Lambeth, and obviously that would be something that were ever to be a marvellous Conservative-run Lambeth that we would look at. But it's obviously that's quite unlikely because there's only me who's a councillor in Lambeth at the moment. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to answer that, and I'm not being glib in terms of my response to that, but I don't know enough about it to be able to say something meaningful about how the GLA could deal with that and how that interacts with local authority and what the law is. With regards to the affordable housing, I think the Labour Marina, the Labour Marina, the Labour candidate, I think she's right when she said, look, you know, affordable housing is 30%, you know, and if we can get it up to 50%, that would be great. But I think the reality is, you know, there's a balance between what, you know, it would be great to have more affordable housing, but then, you know, you have to also attract people, you know, developers to want to be able to build these properties. And if you get that balance wrong, as Sadiq Khan did for many years starting, you know, you end up not building any properties. And I stand by my, you know, the stats that I gave. You know, the number of family-sized homes funded by the mayor's house building program has fallen 30% in 3 years. I mean, it's fallen by a third. You know, anyone would think the mayor was only interested in wealthy, woke, middle-class people who didn't need homes, but what do I know? I mean, and in terms of so I stand by those figures. I think I mean, Sean Bailey has made a number of very intelligent pledges, I think, he's talking about taking control of the building process with a developer. And I think that differs really from things that place sort of local authority versions like Homes for Lambeth, because if you've got a City Hall control developer and he's using City Hall planning powers, then that would, I think that would accelerate the number of homes built and it would facilitate the way in which homes are built, the communication with developers and the ability to get stuff done. I mean, he's talking about building a lot on brownfield sites. There's 2,600 hectares of brownfield sites and, you know, a potential 287,000 homes. And I think that's possible. I remember poor old Zach Goldsmith in 2014 talking a lot about building on brownfield sites and TfL having a lot of land which could be used for building on, and Sadiq Khan hasn't done any of that, and his record on building houses is really appalling. Sorry, is that have I run out of time or? Sorry, are you speaking, Grace?
I think Grace is trying to say that you've run out of time. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so if we can move on to Florence then, please.
Yes, thank you. So it's not easy to be Mayor of London. I think nobody can deny this. There's a housing crisis going on for decades. And I think that maybe we need to look at the housing issue in a different perspective. Of course, Tim has mentioned the issue with developers.
Just going to move to Florence to.
Sorry, I can hear. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, Florence. It's okay. I think Grace is.
There were interferences. I'm sorry. Right. Yes, I was saying that it's not easy to be Mayor of London. The Mayor of London is responsible for housing, partly with local authorities, and that's a major issue. But the Mayor of London is also responsible for the fire brigade, as we said, for the police and for TfL. And of course, those are very complex issues with a lot of investment going on. There's no magic wand. We won't solve the housing crisis easily. We need to hold politicians into account, and this is why we have elections. So the Lib Dem candidate, Louisa Porritt, pledged to end the cladding scandal. Okay, so cladding scandal is one priority, and our key messages are jobs for London, homes, so housing is one of the key issues, of course, Lib Dems are going to look at, and clean air. We haven't talked much about, well, we have talked about the environmental impact of embodied carbon in demolitions and rebuilding. We haven't talked about, for example, the air pollution in the tube, which is very significant. So we need a deep clean of the tube as well. Of course, we were talking about housing. Housing, as we have said, there were many points made about this in this conversation. I really enjoyed this debate because there were so many good points made. Housing is a responsibility of both the local authorities and the Mayor of London. And the London Assembly is here to scrutinize the decision of the Mayor of London. So as a Liberal candidate, in the London Assembly. This is why I want to bring a new perspective. I want to bring my skills and abilities that I've gained in other countries and I've gained being a mother and working in higher education. And I would really encourage everybody to vote on the 6th of May. It's really important. It's a healthy process that we have a democracy and we can maybe hold into account officials who have not delivered. So the housing crisis is the main issue. Nothing's working. We need a new perspective. So we need to vote for new politicians and a new political class. So this would be my key message.
Yeah, thank you very much, Florence. Okay, if we can move now to Claire.
Hello. Right, I've taken my glasses off. I'm going to do it all off without looking at the chat this time. I want to say regarding district heating, I actually know what district heating is, like some of the other candidates. And you're right, it's a scam. It's too expensive. There's a climate emergency. Councils persist in enforcing it on residents. I know in my local ward that there's been horrible instances of it being stuck on in the summer, stuck off in the winter. It doesn't work. It's a terrible thing. And for the amazing 35% campaign, bow down to you lot. Absolutely sterling work. You're absolutely right. The level of social housing is nowhere near enough, and affordable housing isn't enough. 35% affordable housing, it's not affordable for most people. It's a stupid phrase for it. We need, and a Green Mayor would bring in minimum limits of social housing in any new development. So we're building up on net amount of social housing, not decimating it, because the amount of social housing that we have lost because councils have sold off estates, people's homes, people's communities are not brownfield sites. They are people's homes and people's communities, and they should be as such. Any development that happens should be coming from the residents up. We're looking at having champions. We're looking at having a London Commission across, so communities can select sites, select what they want them used for, whether they want the green space, whether they want community space built on them, whether they want housing built on them, whether they want youth services built on them. All things that London desperately needs. I know at Central Hill there's 467 units there, and there's 4 places there where they could have community space there. For some reason, Lambeth Council won't give them. I think it's a shame that some of my fellow colleagues on the panel haven't done their homework and gone round to Cressingham, Central Hill, to South London, and to court and met these people out there and understood the things. I understand that given first past the post system for constituency candidates, it's very likely that Marina will be elected on May the 6th. And I think that's a terrible shame, because I would work my backside off for you, Southwark and Lambeth, I really would. And I think that there's a lot of rhetoric in this election, especially from the 2 main male candidates, that this is somehow a 2-horse race. I don't see it as a 2-horse race. London's had enough of horses. We need a unicorn. We need a fresh start. We need Sean Berry. We need Green Assembly members. Obviously, I am going to say that because I am one, but I really, really urge a lot of you, if you've got time, to have a look through the manifesto. There's a lot of good stuff in here. The housing stuff, I think, is peerless. We're better than any of the others on housing. We simply are, because we care about it. And I wanted to say thank you very much to Grace and Claudia for hosting the event today. Even though it's been like revising for an exam, I've loved having this opportunity to speak to people. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Claire. And unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Grace. So I'm going to have to do the winding up. Thank you so much to all our candidates, and thank you also for all of those who prepared questions, all the people that sent questions in advance, and also you know, all the people that have been contributing to the chat. That's really great, and we will of course pass all of those comments and questions to the candidates. as well. Please look out for the final video of this. We're going to edit it down a little bit and then circulate it. So hopefully it'll get out to a wider audience. So thank you so much for everybody who's attended. Yeah, we look forward to more of these, and of course the outcomes of the elections. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Claudia, for all your work on this.
No problem.
It was really good. And I don't know if Grace can still hear us, but she did a terrific amount, as you know.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
She did the majority. So yeah,
Absolutely.
big thanks to her.
So, absolutely, thank you, and to the candidates for joining as well. We hope it's been an education for all of us. We've all learned maybe we can make something a heck of a lot better, whoever wins.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and everyone for organising this. I've actually learned a lot. Thank you very much. And if elected, I will work my heart out for you. That's what I'm here to do. But thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. I hope to see you all soon. Bye now.